Elizabeth?
Either or is fine.
Okay.
Well, hello, Professor Klotz. Welcome to the show. I am so glad that you're here.
Thanks, Liz. I'm glad to be here too.
Absolutely. So, I mean, right out the gate, my question has to be, how does a professional soccer player get into the wild world of the
Oh man, I guess I needed to make more money than $2,000 a month, which is what I was making when I was a professional soccer. So I had to think about what am I going to do with my life beyond this. And I mean, I've always been interested in like climate and sustainability issues, and so and my background was in engineering, and so I kind of took that, started looking at how these things that I care about merge together. And, there's just this fundamental problem of we can't just do more and more and more and more and solve some of these most important issues that our society is facing. So, I mean, that happened over 15 years, but it's that's the short story of how it happened.
I love it. And how did your physical training, coaches, being accountable to teammates, how did that prepare you for the rigors of academia? Those included in all of that. And what else did you have in place that made you, able to take on that next level, that higher level that paid more than 2,000 a month?
I think, yeah, it's just totally invaluable. So talking about individual performance, I guess we'll start there. But when you're playing a sport and trying to do it at the highest level possible, you start thinking about everything, right? Like how you spend your time, how what you eat impacts your performance after you eat, how much sleep you get impacts your performance the next day. And so you're just constantly trying to tweak these things about your life and seeing how they affect the outcomes that you care about. And I don't my livelihood doesn't depend on how fast I can run or how well I can play with a ball anymore, but it does depend on how well my brain works. And all of these uh, same skills are relevant. And so, I mean, I think when I have a mental block, or so I'll give you a more concrete example. Is like for me, it's just fundamental to think, okay, well, after I wake up and I just had a workout this morning, and that's when I will schedule the podcast because that's when I'll have the most like mental aptitude and I'll be most interesting for the listeners. And so, I mean, I think that's something that follows directly from sports. So that's some of the individual stuff, and then some of the team stuff. I mean, I think the if you've played on real teams and done like real competition, it makes the competition in academia seem kind of trivial, right? It's like, what are we fighting about? Like, there's there's no reason we can't all be successful. We're all working on different stuff. We're all trying to contribute to knowledge and share knowledge. And the fact that the guy one office over from me or the woman one office over from me is doing great doesn't mean that I can't also do great. So I think it's really helped with that kind of collaboration and learning that the best things and the most enjoyable things, quite frankly, happen when you're working really hard with a group of other people. That happens in academia as well as in soccer. Does that make
Yeah.
sense?
Oh, absolutely. I love said that. We were talking about earlier how I have two boys and you have children. And
Yeah.
it's like that sports element really does change the brain and change the attitude of the child early on so that they can be successful in life and effectively work with others from a place of confidence versus competition. It's still competitive, but what's your take on that?
Yeah, that's a great. My buddy Ben, he's in the book because he's a collaborator on the research, but he sent me a text about his son who's been playing soccer, and his son said to him, "Hey, I crossed the line," and his son was meaning like he like flipped the switch, and like you said, it's this sports is this really controlled environment that shows you if you like work at something you can see that you're getting better, right? And so like his son had played soccer with us a couple times with the grown-ups and then went back to his kids team and realized that he could like dribble a little bit more and shoot. And it's like he's probably not going to be a professional soccer player, but that's a useful life skill to learn that like, hey, if you work at something, you get better. And so I think that's amazing, the amazing thing with sports. And like you said, it's, you don't want to get it to where it's so competitive. I'll stay with a soccer example. I mean, Christian Pulisic, he's the best, well, arguably the best player that America has ever produced. And there's some really great articles online about how he was brought up with soccer, and his parents were like, just after the game, take him out to ice cream.
Mm.
So, I mean, that competition, it doesn't help with being overly demanding as parents doesn't help with creating professional soccer players, and it obviously doesn't help with creating, kids who are going to be successful in the world after they're done playing soccer.
I love that. I love that. And to transition more to what you're doing now. You're out with a new book called Subtract: The Untapped Science of Less. How did that book come about, and why do you feel like now is the for a book like this world?
I'll start with how it came about. Like I said, I've long been interested in these sustainability issues and this kind of decoupling progress from more. But the book really builds on new research that we did, and that's what makes it, I think, the most timely. And so, I mean, long story short, what we found was that we systematically overlook subtraction as a way to make things better. So whether we're trying to improve our schedule, whether we're trying to improve a piece of writing, whether we're trying to make a Lego structure, I mean, these are all things that we tested in experiments. Our first instinct is to think, hey, what can I add to this to make it better? Which isn't necessarily a problem, but the problem comes when you add and move on without even thinking of subtracting in the first place. And I think that's what makes it really timely, is the book came out at the same time as that research, which was on the cover of Nature, which has never happened to me before and will never happen again. I mean, that's like the most prestigious academic journal, and has gotten amazing reception in academia. But I think the book is like, hey, this is super important or super useful for people. So how can I do my job kind of sharing knowledge in this case, and get it out there in a way that people can understand it and that people can use it. So that's the timeliness argument for the book.
It's kind of like divine almost, in a way, like everything that you've been working for, everything that you especially when it comes to architecture and climate change. Do you feel like it was almost like this needed to happen now? I mean, it's odd how things come into place. Like even how, you got onto the soccer team and stuff like that. I feel like sometimes it does play a role.
I don't know if it's it's weird. It seems divine, but also like really I mean, it was certainly divine that the paper came out a week before the book. I mean, so like whatever you believe in was like divine or fate or just like this ridiculous coincidence that the timing of those two things happened like that. Also that like all of the ideas kind of came together at that time. So I don't know. I also think that it's like when you're sharing information, you're just like kind of sharing at a moment in time, right? And your thinking evolves after that and before that. But it certainly was like, hey, this is a moment where we have to share this.
Yeah. The premise of the book, why is it that you've done numerous studies that by adding a Lego set or designing a room or putting on, certain, I think that adding is going to make things better and more efficient.
Yeah, that's a quote I didn't put in the book by Coco Chanel. It's like, before you leave your house, remove one article of clothing. It's like, there's so many of those quotes. And I think the quotes are some of the best evidence that we overlook it, right? Because it's like, everybody's like, oh, that's a pithy Coco Chanel quote. It's so memorable. And you don't need the reminder to, before you leave the house, add a piece of clothing. That doesn't become like a viral quote. So the fact that these reminders are so long lived, and Lao Tzu, to to gain wisdom, or to gain knowledge, add things every day; to gain wisdom, subtract things every day. It's like that's one of the oldest quotes in the world, and it's about subtracting to make things better. So I think, we talked about how just cognitively in our thinking process, when we try to change something from how it is to how we want it to be, we think of adding first. So that's one reason. But if you go back more to kind of evolutionary or cultural reasons, just acquiring things has been a good way to pass down our genes, right? Acquiring food, acquiring shelter, and also another one that's surprisingly rooted in our biology is just this desire to display competence. And I think, this applies a lot to parenting, at least for me. It's like, I want to be a competent parent. I want to show that I can effectively change the world. And if I do something for my kid, that's visible evidence that I'm being competent. And, the reason that's biological is because people who can, or animals that can display competence, are likely to have good genes and more likely to acquire a mate. And so the story I use in the book is bowerbirds. These are the male bowerbirds build ceremonial nests, and then the female bowerbirds go around and look at the nests and decide who to mate with based on how much they like the nest, and which all sounds normal. But then the female bowerbird goes and builds a well, normal, not normal in terms of how it should be, but normal in terms of how kind of evolution works, right? And that good shelter would be a good way to pass down your genes. But then the female goes and builds the nest to raise the kids, right? So the whole point of this first nest is just to show that the male bowerbird can effectively interact with the world. So we all share that desire to show that we're doing things, and it even extends to task completion. And obviously, like, privilege is adding, right? When you add something, there's visible evidence that you added. When you subtract something, it's like it's gone, right? And so there's not that visible evidence. And so that's a kind of two of the deep biological reasons why we might kind of think of adding first.
An explanation, because I think so many people understand that when you that way, but it's not something we immediately think about. It's like when you were doing your experiments, people weren't doing something better by taking it away until you said, hey, you can subtract things as well. Like, oh, it's just not the go-to.
Exactly. Yeah, it's not like we can't do it. So
Yeah.
your podcast is doing a service to humanity by reminding people that, hey, subtracting is an option. And that's like the experiments you're referring to are really, I mean, we'd simply say, hey, you can add or subtract, remember. And, the reminder increased rates of subtracting, which you're like, oh, of course, that's what reminders are supposed to do. But the reminder didn't increase rates of adding. So what that shows is that, like, people are already thinking of adding. People weren't thinking of subtracting before the reminder. And so can you have a reminder like this podcast? And if you need a longer reminder, go read my book. Or if you also, can you put in place reminders right now when you're thinking about it? It's like, okay, I listened to Liz. She said I need reminders to subtract. And so now I'm going to force myself when I do my to-do list to also think about stop doings. Or when I take on a new activity for my kid, I'm gonna evaluate their current activities and be like, oh, maybe now that my 7-year-old is, playing soccer, I don't need to put his shoes on for him in the morning before school. So those kind of reminders, when you're making the decision, can help ensure that you don't overlook this as a way to make things better.
Hitting on such a bigger level than you even realized, because there's so many of us, especially, but even just type A ultra performers who have that to-do list, who have these things. And again, fourth factor, am I doing enough? Am I being enough? Am I a good person? Am I a good? And if you're not like making the list chock full and checking it off, you kind of feel less than. And I'm too, like, I will make a list and then I'll add things to it, and if I don't do it, then I'm like, oh, I'm useless. And it's crazy And so I think even just to hear you say that, it's just such a breath of fresh air. Like we need this.
Yeah, thanks. I mean, I think I'm, I fit in all those categories too. I'm like and but that like learning about competence and learning of this desire that we have to display competence has really helped me thinking about, okay, these are things that this is something that I'm doing just to display competence, right? I'm going to this
Mm,
meeting that I'm not going to say anything in, or I don't have anything useful to say in, just so that my coworkers see that I'm here and to display competence, and I can get rid of that. So yeah, it's especially, and then, when you throw kids into the mix and you're just busier than ever, like you can't more your way out of it.
yeah, you literally can. So what's the difference between subtraction versus like essentialism or minimalism?
There's certainly elements of essentialism in subtraction, and but I mean, subtraction is just this very specific action, right? And so minimalism
Mm,
is often the end state of, okay, I don't have a lot of stuff, and there's two ways to get to that. One is to just never have a lot of stuff, right? Never acquire it. And the other way is to, like, okay, you've accumulated a bunch of good stuff, whether it's, I'm saying stuff, but it's not just physical things. It could be social interactions. It could be stuff that's on your calendar. It could be ideas that are in your head. So you've accumulated a bunch of good stuff, and then you subtract to take away that's even better. And so, I mean, the simplest difference is that subtracting is the action that kind of helps you get to those places. But I also think that there's a version of those, essentialism and minimalism, where subtracting isn't required. It's just kind of this lazy form of less, not in a bad way. I mean,
mm,
sometimes the way to less is just not to do anything, but subtracting is a very type A thing, right? Because it requires you to do all this stuff and then keep doing it to keep taking away to get to a better end state that hopefully relieves some of these burdens that you were talking about.
yeah. What's your advice on prioritizing what really matters in a person's life? Because sometimes you feel like, well, everything's a priority, and I couldn't possibly take away piano lessons. Child will never get to Harvard. I mean, what do you like? How do you,
Yeah.
as a parent, as a researcher, what would you suggest to people listening?
I just go back to those priorities, right? It's so easy to not ask those hard questions about what are our priorities and what are our values. I mean, maybe your priority is to get your kid into Harvard, and that's not super bad thing, I guess. And so then you can filter all your like, is this helping my kid get into Harvard? But I doubt that that's anybody's core priority. I mean, the core priority is probably more along the lines of, hey, I want my kid to live a fulfilling life, and I want them to have the same opportunities that I had. And so I think that well, in this, there is even research that kind of supports this, is that we add when we're just like kind of go along unthinkingly. Like that's what our research showed, that our default mode of making things better is to add. And so if just the very act of thinking about your priorities, slowing down, and then kind of analyzing the stuff that you're doing in terms of, is this aligned with my priorities, should reveal more subtractions. So I know that's like I didn't give people what their priorities should be, but I really think that, like, just, hey, figure out what your priorities are, and that's going to be something that we often don't spend enough time doing.
Yeah. Anything that you had to eliminate from your life when you were researching and writing the book that normally would be on question it, but like it was like a harder decision to pull it away?
Um, yeah, I'm trying to think what the most interesting ones are. I mean, certainly a lot of these tasks, for me, tasks at work that I was doing that were marginally useful, but it just became impossible to do them and get this much more useful work done. And that was really hard because for like a long lead item like a book, I mean, now that there's a book and people in, my colleagues see, okay, look, this had an impact in terms of sharing knowledge. Nobody's questioning it. But when you're spending 3 years on a project and it's like, why isn't Leidy at this, committee meeting? And that that kind of prioritization was hard for me, but absolutely vital in making this happen. I think on the parenting, we've got our son is now 7. He features in the book. He's 3 in most of the book stories, and then he's 7 now. But now we have a daughter who's almost 3, and just being able to evaluate the stuff that you're doing for your kids, and this maybe gets back to the priorities. It's like, what is my goal here? My goal is a kid who can like be effective in the world and enjoy their life in the world, and is me doing this thing for them really helping helping with that? And so that's another thing. And then the last one, the hardest one, I think, is to subtract ideas, right? Is to, here's this thing that I believe, and the way we build our mental models is very similar to the way we build houses. I mean, some of the same language is used, right? It's called constructivism, and we basically take new ideas and jam them into our brains around the ideas that we've already got there, and which is fine, except for if you're building on ideas that aren't right in the first place. So, periodically, like, really questioning what you think. I know for me, like the murder of George Floyd and the stuff that came after that, it's like I never thought there was a perfectly level playing field in America. I wasn't like that, but it certainly made me like rethink some of my ideas about everybody having the same shot. Also, parenting has helped with that, right? When you see a 5-year-old who doesn't have the same parental, situation that my kids have, you just realize it's like we need to do more, people who are being like kind of lost in the system. So yeah, subtracting, like ruthlessly prioritizing my time, really thinking about the benefit of the parenting things that I'm doing, and then the subtracting ideas are some of the ways that I've had to do it over the past 5 years or so.
I love. I mean, you're working towards something. You finally have this finished product, but through that process, I mean, they always say it's about the journey, not the. Wow, that was just incredible.
Yeah, it is. It's amazing. The journey is amazing, and getting to like, really surprised at this kind of after part of the journey. It's like you've got this book, and then this is amazing. Like really smart people like you read it, and then I get to talk to them about it, and you get to hear what resonated, and so it's really, you know self-indulgent in a way. It's like I feel like I'm learning probably definitely more than anybody from this process.
Oh, that's so no, like that's why this is like my favorite job I'll ever have, is because I get to, and get to the core of these big ideas that are going to be in the world. Like I stuff to you. But it did spark my, like, what do you think we as a society for, I don't know, a more equal playing field for people, or even just kids who are falling through the system? Like, I know this is such a big question, but you're kind of on top of it right now. Like, what do you think we as a society to help more?
I mean, this is obvious, but like racism, right? It's like so much of the,
Oh, just that.
well, this is just, but no, but seriously, I mean, when you think about, people care about this, right? They're like, oh, we need, equal opportunity and justice. And then like the first thing is like, okay, how do we hire more brown people in our organization? It's like, of course, do that, but also like, what about the racist guy? Like, can we get rid of the racist guy? Or and so I think Ibram Kendi's stuff has done a really good job of drawing attention to kind of, we need to be more proactive with getting rid of this bad thing. I don't like. I'm trying to think of so that's the racism one. The level playing field. I don't know. It's really interesting, at least where I am with the schools, that to see it's not like a fight, but like this tension between like public and private schools.
Yeah,
And the
Virginia
parents
is
now.
insane right now.
Yeah, and so it just seems nuts to me that we don't have public education that is good enough that every single parent would say, "Oh yeah, I'm sending my kids there," right? If as a society we're saying like, "Oh, maybe I'm going to move my kid out of the public school in 5th grade," you're like, that means you don't like the system's not working. And it just strikes me as, I don't know if that's a subtraction, but that on the level playing field, that just like really strikes me as, and I worry because it seems like it's going in the direction of, oh, everybody will just like pay for their kids to go to school, and
Yeah.
whoever has the most money will be able to pay for the, you know, the lowest student teacher ratios, and that's like
Yeah.
exacerbating this problem.
Completely. Completely.
Do you have things that you think we could subtract on the to level the playing field? I'm trying to think
I
of
mean,
other.
I worked in the government like 10, 11 years, so any amount of bureaucracy that you can subtract, I think is a healthy move towards.
Yeah, and my friend Bob Sutton, he wrote the no asshole rule, and he's a Stanford professor.
Yes.
So his next book is like about friction and bureaucracies and like
Mm.
how, you know, some amount of friction is good actually, but I can't give away too much of it, but like look for that. You should interview him. He's amazing, and I agree. I mean, I
Mm.
think obviously I'm not like anti-government. I think like that there's a lot of good that it does, but in every kind of organization, it's just we do the same thing. We unthinkingly add, and we don't question the
Mm-hmm.
things that have been added. One of the stories I use in the book is the Army. They did this really cool report on Army officers and how they were spending their time. And the neat thing was like Army officers get like, here's this task that has to take 4 hours. You have to spend 4 hours on it. So you can literally add up the number of hours they were required to spend on things, and it was more hours than they had in the year. So, but so what you're forcing there, and I think I can certainly empathize with this, is you're forcing them to cut corners, right? So here are these upstanding officers who have gotten where they are by doing exactly what's been asked of them to the best of their ability, super honest. And the only way they can do their job is to cut corners and cheat and say, okay, yeah, here's this 4 hour task. I'm going to spend 2 hours on it because I know I need more time on the other thing. And it just strikes me that so many organizations are now designed like that, right? I have way more stuff that I'm supposed to do than time to do it in. And so it's like one of the reasons I'm effective is because
Yeah.
I'm good at cutting corners, and that's kind of a shitty skill to to incentivize in people. So yeah, cutting out some of the bureaucracy. I don't maybe some of the I don't know. I'm not an economist, but it does seem like some of the wealth sharing between generations could be subtracted to help with some of these issues. I mean, it doesn't, I maybe after I pass down money to my kids, but
Yeah.
but it's, you know, you think about that, it's like so a lot of my decisions are, would be different if there was a bigger social safety net, and I could, um, know that my kids were going to be taken care of no matter what happened
Yeah.
to me. So.
Oh, totally. Totally. I mean, it's exciting to see, and I think that that's a big part of your book. I mean, it's presenting this thing of what could change in architecture, in the climate. You know, you're smart and so simple with the way you present things. I think it has to keep moving. What do you want the legacy of your book to be? What change do you want it to make in the world?
Another way to that they can change the world. And so, yeah, I want people like your listeners to have more of their options available for making change. And this is subtracting is this very basic option that we underuse. And I think, you know, if more people use it, the world will be an even better place.
Yeah, and for those listening who really are reticent to take away anything, what is it they should do it? What implications happen if they don't do it?
The same, it's just the same overwhelm, right? I go back to the activities, right? But you're not happy when you're just running from thing to thing and never have
Mm-hmm.
time to do a good job with anything. I mean, I think we all felt that, or at least a lot of us felt that way when we were forced to kind of work and parent at the same time. You're like, this sucks. I'm doing my
Mm-hmm.
best at two things, but it's not good enough at either thing. And so if you don't, you know, okay, maybe we're through the worst of that situation, but it's the same thing in your daily life. If you're not unable to take things away, you're just in this constant state of overwhelm, and that's at the individual scale. But then, you know, move that up to the planetary scale, and you know, climate change is one issue where we literally have more CO2 in the atmosphere than scientists think is safe to have there, we need to subtract some of the CO2, and we're past some of these other planetary tipping points too, where the problem is that we've just kind of added too much. And I know that's a very gross oversimplification of a very complex issue, but this mindset that we can just build our way out of things isn't gonna fix these issues. I don't know if you've seen this stat. I just came across it that the amount of human-made stuff in the world now exceeds the amount of biomass. So like the amount of stuff that
Wow.
we've built exceeds the amount of nature. And so we're like, our actions are what's shaping the health of our planet. And that's, to date, that hasn't been, we haven't done a really good job of that, but it also is empowering in that, like, okay, if our actions are shaping the health of the planet, then it's in our hands to actually do something about it.
Mm, exactly. Exactly. That is what I want to leave the listeners with today. Do you have any other final thoughts, the message of the book, of your legacy and what you want to leave with the world?
I would say like one more opportunity to turn people's attention to that, the power of subtracting wrong ideas. And one of the reasons I do it is because it's the hardest one, and I don't
Mm,
have any great tips of like, here's the best way to definitely subtract wrong ideas, but that can be incredibly powerful if you can do it. And that's, the path to wisdom, as Lao Tzu says.
yeah. Do you think self-awareness is a key component in that?
Oh yeah. I mean, you can't do it without self-awareness, right? And it also probably supports self-awareness, right? Because like when you're analyzing, oh, what do I think, or what do my actions reflect in terms of what I think? And it also gets back maybe to this, your great point about values and priorities, right? I mean, you thinking about what you think or what your mental models are gets right back to like what your priorities are, and that's how you can kind of filter things.
Mm, I love it. I'm excited to see your work and where it goes in the world and what changes you make. I'll be following along, as will the listener. Leidy, where can we get the book and find out more about you online?
Anywhere the books are sold, you can get the book. And there's a Kindle version and an audiobook version if you like listening. And I have an easy Google name, so Leidy Klotz, Leidyklotz, and you can find out the latest stuff. But honestly, I'm on Twitter and uh, what's the other one? LinkedIn. But the best place is the book. That's where all my good stuff is. I haven't figured out how to write good things on Twitter yet.
Oh, it's coming. It's coming.
It's coming,
Leidy, thank
yeah.
you so much for your time. I really enjoyed it. Pleasure.
Thank you, Liz. I appreciate